Welcome, everyone, to the Story Cafe. This is the first recording of the year, so we've made it to 2025, and I wanted to share with you a bit about where my head and my heart has been with this podcast. This project started as a writing project because probably almost a decade ago, maybe longer than a decade ago, I really started thinking about capturing my own life story as a way of healing myself, but also as a way of sharing hope. And as I started writing those stories, they sounded a lot like podcasts and not really like a memoir. So I decided last year my theme was kind of doing crazy things and taking risks. So I decided in 2024 that instead of trying to write like a memoir, which is what I started with, that I would start recording a podcast. And so some of the things I've struggled with in 2024 with a podcast are the skills needed to make it a reasonable quality. So there's a whole set of skills around recording things that I don't really have. And I'm Googling and watching videos as I go, but it's certainly not a strong suit of mine. And then I struggled when I couldn't find the time to work on it. So I started this project, and then suddenly my calendar was full of things. And so I really struggled with that. But probably most of all, I struggled when I felt like I ran out of things to say. And I started to try to create podcasts that I thought people wanted to hear, which were fine. And I enjoyed them, and they were, I enjoyed making them and they were lovely. But they didn't all feel great to me. Like I felt really good about my first couple podcasts. And then there were some of them where I was like, meh, it's not my best, but it's something because I got to get something out there. So as I turn to the new year, I've been doing a bit of reflecting on what I want in 2025 to have having this podcast, what I want in my life in 2025, what my focus should be. And in general, the theme that I keep coming back to for my own life is this idea of acceptance. One of the things I really like to do this time of year, which I think most people do, is kind of just reflect on how their year went and what they want for themselves in the future. And I've been doing that. I've been thinking a lot about who I am, who I want to be, all the kind of questions one asks themselves in their 40s and in their 30s and 20s. Probably most of our lives we spend actually thinking a bit about who we want to be, who we are, where we're going. And I've struggled probably my whole life to put a finger on what I'm good at. Not because I don't think I'm good at things. I have a lot of confidence about the skills that I have. But I've never really been able to put my finger on what they are because I feel like they're kind of intangible. So some people exist in the world and their skills are in like computers and they can build computers or fix computers. Some people, they're really good at building things, or they're carpenters or they're plumbers. Some skills are really easy to name. And I think for me, the skills that I have in this world are more what we might call like soft skills. I'm a people person in many ways, and I think my strengths have always lied in this place. And so I started to think about what I want in my life and what I realized. And I was thinking like big picture, not just 2025, but I'm in school right now doing my master's to be a school counselor. I have a new job this year, which I really love. But it's also got me thinking about like, what do I want the next chapter? So I've been on this planet 43 years. What do the next 43 look like? And that gets me thinking about, well, what about job and career and how to have a life that is fulfilling and challenging and all the things. And so what I realized when I was lying in bed last night because I couldn't sleep is that like when it's all said and done, I think what I really want to be able to do is inspire people. I want to create moments or podcasts or interactions that inspire people, especially around this idea of like finding your own resilience, because life can be really difficult. And it's, in many ways, one of the pillars of this podcast. So for me, I think in my life, what I really want to do is inspire people to see the resilience in their own life and see their own strength and push through, because I think this life can be really lonely, but it doesn't have to be. And in my work with students, I'm often drawn towards encouraging and pushing them to see the world ahead of them as an adventure that will be full of hard things, an adventure they're capable of tackling. And at the center of that inspiration, I think for me is hope. And in a time, on a planet that a lot of things feel hopeless, I think our shared experiences of overcoming hard things or continuing to push through hard things can be that light to keep us going. So, with Story Cafe, I want to take it back to kind of its original roots where I started. And instead of focusing on content that I think makes sense, I'm going to share with you the stories that feel right in the moment in hopes of offering a glimmer of hope sprinkled with some realism, mixed in with some inspiration. Because the reality is, I have had a roller coaster of a life. I've been in really terrible situations, but also I've been cared for and loved. And I have used all those moments as my own inspiration and my own light so that I can be in the world right now and experience joy and laughter, love and friendship alongside of all the messy stuff that comes with that. And I want to share those stories with you. I want to share with you how I push through those things. And so that means that sometimes it'll be a lot of stories about when I was a kid. Sometimes it'll be a lot of stories about my mom because she was a big inspiration for me. And sometimes it'll be stories about all the different people that like help me move through those things. Because I actually think, and I've talked about this before in here, but at the center of like my own resilience has been the people that have cared for me and loved me, but also my belief in myself. And so I want to share that with all of you. So to get the year started, I thought I would tell you a bit about my theme for the year and why I chose it. I've always been someone who leans, away from resolutions because I feel like they can be really restrictive. And they usually come out of like this chocolate and turkey induced dreams about what you want for the next year. And they're not always realistic, or they don't always like accommodate that life happens. I mean, if I'm being honest, most years my biggest hope is that my family gets sick just a little bit less than the year before, right? So I lean more into this idea of picking a theme for the year and something that kind of has been resonating with me, something that can be a bit of a North Star. So in picking themes, I always kind of just lean into where my reflections are taking me. So I know that sounds kind of willy-nilly, but it does work for me. I usually reflect a bit on the year before. I take notice of what I'm feeling, and usually something kind of bubbles to the surface and comes to me. This year, what floated to the top is acceptance, and maybe even a little bit of radical acceptance. So for many reasons, I think in the world that we live in and the culture that we live in, and I recognize that like I say and have these perspectives from where I live in Nova Scotia, Canada, in kind of a Western kind of culture of seeing the world. And this is not how all cultures in all places around the world see things. It's just my experience in the culture that I sit in. But I think a lot of times in the culture that I do sit in, I've noticed how much we desire to change things that we can't change. And I am no exception to that. So, the past, as an example, we spend a lot of time wishing things had been different. We use phrases like hindsight is 2020. We relive conversations in our heads wishing they'd been different. We struggle to accept things that are already done. And when you explore deeper into things like trauma, and many people get lost wishing things were different. And for really good reasons, right? Experiencing abuse or accidents or any kind of trauma that changes who you are and changes the person you'll become is awful. And yet, the one thing we 100% can't change is the past. And sometimes we can get really like fixated on why things happen, who's at fault for something that happened. And I always advocate for like processing through those things. But the reality is we can't change them. Another thing we can't change are the people and their decisions. So no matter how hard you try, people of a certain age, and it's pretty young, make their own choices. They pave their own paths and they do what they want to do. even if it's not what you think is right, even if it's not what you agree with, even if you want them to do something different, people make their own choices, right? We can get really focused on like wishing other people would change. And besides trying to change the past and trying to change other people, I know that I certainly also try to change myself in ways that are unneeded or unnecessary. So this year, that is my theme, acceptance. Acceptance of both things that have been done to me, the mistakes I've made along the way, accepting that I can't change other people. All I can do is offer support, maybe some inspiration, and most importantly, maybe accepting my own strengths and gifts and accepting my own limitation. As I've talked about on this podcast, physical movement is really important to me. Joyful movement is really important to me. But I've also, I don't want to say it's because of my age, but I do think it has something to do with it. But also just because of, things that have happened to my body, in the last number of years. I do have limitations, and I have been battling myself and criticizing myself for those limitations. So this year, I'm going to work towards accepting those things, because I think we are who we are, and and I love to grow and learn because I think that makes life interesting. But I also have to accept, parts of me that just are who I am. So I wanted to share a little memory with you from when I was 10 years old. And I think I was 10. I don't 100% know if I was 10, but I think I was like 9, 10 years old. And I lived in a foster home, and my foster mother at the time also babysat kids at lunch and after school. So I lived in this home with 4 other kids. Like there were 5 of us in total who lived there. But then there were often like 3 or 4 other kids at lunchtime or after school who came to the house as well. So there were always a lot of kids around. And as sometimes 9 and 10-year-olds do, when they know nothing about relationships, they somehow decide to not like get in a pair and name each other boyfriend and girlfriend. And not in the way that it means nothing. It's literally just a label. So at that certain time, like it certainly didn't mean anything. I didn't know what it meant. But there was this other kid that was there. And for one day, basically, we decided we were going to be boyfriend and girlfriend. And I don't even know how that happened. I don't know why that happened. I don't know what it meant. But it was literally like 24 hours. So we were running around the house playing, and I ran down the stairs, and you know how like when you're a kid and you run down the stairs and like you skip the last step and you kind of jump. So I did that. And in the process of jumping and chasing him down the stairs, as sometimes 9 or 10-year-olds do, I bopped him in the head, which really means I kind of punched him. I don't know that I meant to as much as like I was trying to tag him. Long story short, he got pretty angry, and that was the end of that relationship, which to be honest was really just a label anyway. But he got really angry and I got really defensive, and I blamed him and he blamed me. But it comes up for me like you know that saying, if you don't stop horsing around, someone's gonna get hurt? That statement applied to me over and over and over again. You know, I was always the kid that accidentally got too rough and went too far, probably because I never understood my own strength. But I can think of countless examples like this where I'm horsing around, I'm playing with other kids, and then someone gets hurt, and it's often my fault. And it was never intentional, and I never meant to hurt anyone. Like I was never purposely trying to hurt anyone, but I just always took it too far. At least that's how I remember it. And someone out there might be telling the exact same story. And in their story, I was the one that always got hurt, and they were the ones that did the hurting, which is kind of the funny thing about our memories, right? Our mind shifts and changes over time. And so our memories change slightly based on how we felt in the moment. So although I may remember a story one way as a protagonist, another person, right, and I remember the other person as an antagonist, they might remember it very differently. And probably somewhere in the middle of those two stories is something that resembles an accurate picture of what really happened. So back to the story. So I jumped down a couple of stairs, bopped this kid in the head, and I have a really distinct memory of wishing I could take it back almost instantly. He got hurt, as I said, then he got angry, and so I felt bad, which then followed up with my own defensiveness, like it wasn't my fault, as we often do when it is in fact our fault. And even though deep down I knew it was my fault because I felt the guilt of that moment, I was still very, like, defensiveness. But that moment brought up some of my deepest fears as a 10-year-old, and I'd like to say that, like, 10-year-olds shouldn't have these fears. And for a long time, I thought my insecurities as a kid were there only because I had so much trauma. I've since come to realize because I have children who have a pretty well-adjusted life and live in a very safe environment, and I interact with other kids similarly who live in a safe environment, that kids have insecurities and they worry about things, whether they live in a safe place or not. And so for me, that moment brought up so many insecurities that I had about that I couldn't do anything right. That was kind of the thing I always came back to as a kid, that I always broke things. There was something wrong with me. I was always accidentally hurting people. And I just could never do anything right. And I have other memories that follow that kinda similar, like, thought train, is that I mess up, I feel guilt, I get defensive, it's all mixed together to make this soup of anger and sadness, and then I ruminate and attach those mistakes to the storyline that somehow I'm broken. And although those fears for me and those trains of thought were probably a lot more intense because of my trauma, I do know that, like, kids do feel those things. And as adults who spend time with kids, it's really important for us to remember that, like, they're like humans just like us and they worry about things. And if we can create space to talk about that with them, it helps. Because no one talked to me about these things. I didn't know that other people felt this way. It felt very lonely. And so a lot of my childhood had this kind of storyline attached to it. And it would always return to, like, I messed things up and then I felt alone. And so if I fast forward into my 20s, I certainly wasn't, like, roughhousing all the time when I was in my 20s, but I was still really clumsy. I was always really clumsy, and I would drop things, I would break things, and though I had done a lot of work to untangle the story of breaking everything for myself, I'd been to a lot of counseling, I didn't necessarily have that same kind of thought pattern all the time. When I would drop a glass or knock something over, it did bring me back to that time and that story, you know? Just because we go through the process of dealing with our issues and dealing with our insecurities, it doesn't make them go away. They're always, although maybe healed, there's still scars attached to those. So one day I was at a friend's house, a friend and a mentor, and I broke, I don't know if it was a dish or a glass, I don't know what it was, but I broke something and I felt so bad because not only was this person just so kind to me, I was always in awe of the beauty of their home. Like, they just had such nice stuff. So breaking one of their lovely dishes brought some of those really old feelings up because, like I said, they don't just disappear. And I don't remember exactly what she said, but I do remember the sentiment, which was like, "This is just stuff, Adrianna. Stuff can be replaced. Things get broken. It's just part of life, right? All people break things." And it was so profound that as I was writing this earlier today, I actually, like, I found myself getting really choked up about it. And it's so simple. I mean, that's what's phenomenal to me about it. Like, it's such a simple message and such a simple sentiment. But she, in essence, in that moment, gave me permission to be imperfect and to break things and to make mistakes. And that, it doesn't change the past because we can't. We can't change the past. I mean, that's what acceptance is all about. But it gave me permission to recognize that there are things in life that are just kind of human nature. Like sometimes we're clumsy and we break things. Sometimes we trip and fall, and there isn't some big, greater underlying like story of like, oh, you always break things. This is who you are. It just is what it is. And that small moment with her, it changed my future because it helped me see that we break things, that all people break things, that it happens, and it's not a reflection of who you are. It's just a thing that happens. And when I think about this idea of acceptance, there is a pulling apart of recognizing the things that are just part of the world. Bad things happen. They don't necessarily happen because you've done something wrong or you're a bad person. They just happen. Also, breaking a glass isn't necessarily a bad thing. Like it just is, you know? I think this idea that things are either good or bad it's so polarizing. It's some things just are, right? I often, when I work with students and talking to them about their choices for the future, which I do a lot in my new job this year, one of the things I find myself saying over and over and over again is the choices we make, like our next step choice, is just our next step. It's not right. It's not wrong. And I grew up always looking for like the right path or the right decision, right? Waiting for a sign that I was, doing the right thing. And what I've come to realize is like, we can only know the choices we make. We can't know what could have been, what would have been. All we know is what actually is. And so I will often say to students, what the choice you're making right now is just your next step. And there's no wrong next step. And you might get to that next step and realize, oh, you don't really like it there. And then you can change your mind and make another step. Because I think when we free ourselves from this idea that there's a right or a wrong, it feels freeing, I guess. It feels like we don't have to have this weight of wrong decisions and decisions that last us forever on our shoulders, right? And so I think for me, this year is dedicated to kind of retethering to this idea that we're human beings that go through the world and we unintentionally break things and we can apologize. We clean up and we move on. Our mistakes or our mishaps don't define us. It's also a year where I try to grasp acceptance for the things I can't change, whether that be people, situations, or my own realities, right? I can't change the choices that other people make. I can choose who I spend my time with. I can choose how I interact with people, but I can't choose the choices they make. And so I need to let go of that. And I also need to come to an acceptance of my own reality. So what are the things that I can do? What are the things that I can't do? If there are things that I can't do, are there workarounds so I can get to the place that I want to be? I don't want to lose too much energy looking back and wishing things that were completely out of my control would change or were different. I want to focus on accepting and embracing the things that I can change if I want to. And maybe most importantly, I want to be more accepting of the gifts I have and the limitations that I have. I think I don't wish trauma on anyone because it's terrible, but it's also part of my story and I can't undo it. And so there is a piece of just accepting it. And some of that trauma has led to some limitations in my life. And I need to accept that because the sooner that I accept it, the sooner I can stop ruminating on things that I can't change. My limitations don't need to be my whole story. They're really only one part of it. And they don't define who I am, right? They're just one small part of who I am. And sometimes those limitations make us stronger, right? They are our resilience. And so I think I hope I can learn to accept that. So that's what I'm hoping for the year. I'm hoping to lean into acceptance in different moments, accept the things I can change and do something about those things, accept the things I can't change, and not ruminate on the past for which, until someone makes a time machine, we can never change. The past just is what it is. And it is what we remember it to be, right? So how we remember the past and how we look back on it is probably sort of accurate, but most likely it's skewed towards our own feelings in that moment and how we experienced it. So that's my theme for the year. And that's what I'm hoping to do with this podcast is instead of getting stuck on the things that aren't working about it or the things that are challenging about it or the fact that I just don't know how to use GarageBand the way I wish I knew how to use GarageBand. I'm going to try not to ruminate on those things, and I'm going to accept that those are the limitations of doing this project. And I'm going to lean into the parts of this project that I really love, which is talking about hope and inspiration and moving through challenging times and finding joy in a really complicated, messy world. So that's what you're in for 2025. As always, thank you for showing up. Thank you for being so encouraging and kind. Your thoughts that you share with me after each episode are always so lovely. And I hope as you step into 2025 that you find a way to center yourself on a path through the year that has a bit of challenge, lots of laughter and joy, and some acceptance of who you are in all your gifts and all the wonderful things about you. So welcome to 2025. Happy New Year. Bye for now.